The Christian missionaries and the Germans, British and French colonial administrations, working either exclusively, simultaneously, or in succession, laid the groundwork of the educational system that the new independent nation was to inherit. The Cameroon Republic gained independence on 1st January 1960, first for the French colonial government. The following year, on 11th February 1961, through a plebiscite, Southern Cameroon voted overwhelmingly in favor of reunification with the Republic of Cameroon. Consequently, independence, thus leaving the British Empire and forming the Federal Republic of Cameroon. At this stage, two major aspects of educational reforms became evident. The first was to Africanize each of the two inherited systems, and the second was to unify both systems. But on the accession to independence, East Cameroon had signed bilateral treaties with France for economic, military, and cultural cooperation. British ceased to have any direct relations with West Cameroon except through the federal government. During the Constitutional Conference, there was a disagreement on the structure of institutions in the new federation focused on centralization or regionalization and indicated the difficulties of unifying the inherited system. Education in East Cameroon has been maintained at independence under the Ministry of Education, Youth and Culture in a centralized structure as inherited from the French colonial administration. Meanwhile, West Cameroon had fought and gained the cherished decentralized education system by achieving regional status in the Nigerian Federation. Because of independence, educational policies in Cameroon, like in many other African countries, underwent a radical change. It began to be oriented towards meeting the needs of national independence and development in all aspects of national life. During the Federation period, there were three educational authorities: the French government, the East Cameroon government, and West Cameroon government. The two federated governments controlled and inspected nursery schools, primary schools, and primary teacher training institutions. The federal government also controlled and inspected secondary and higher educational institutions. During the period 1961 to 1966, a development plan was drawn up leading to the creation of the first Ministry of National Education, making the birth of National Education System of Cameroon, the educational administrative structure under the federal system. Following Decree No. 62/184 of 12 March 1962, reorganizing the newly created Ministry, National Education, Article 1 of the decree placed the central administration of secondary, technical, linguistic, and cultural centers under the direct authority of the Minister of National Education. A Secretary of State for Education was assigned to East Cameroon with responsibility over primary education, and in the West with the Minister of Social Welfare. A provincial delegate was responsible for the northern parts, handling affairs related to various types of secondary education, youth and sport, mass education, and other educational centers. The attainment of independence in the 1960s, like other African countries, marked an important turning point in the educational history of Cameroon. For the first time, the Cameroon authorities saw the need to determine the form of education that suited them, since colonial authorities restricted their attempts in the beginning. This determination was reflected in the 1961 Addis Ababa Conference that questioned the relevance of the inherited colonial education for African development. It was therefore proposed that African education should be shaped towards producing men and women interested in technological development. Since 1961, the Cameroon educational system has evolved over time, with its different policies focusing on addressing the indigenous, philosophical, sociocultural, and developmental needs of the nation. However, in the face of globalization and internationalization, of education, there is still some level of influence on the educational policies and systems from international organizations like the World Bank, UNESCO, UNICEF, and UNDP, amongst other education-related agencies. Other forms of foreign influence are through education-related bilateral agreements between the Cameroon government and foreign diplomatic missions and institutions. Harmonization of education. Harmonization implied an adaptation or synthesis of both systems of education in terms of educational programs and examinations. This period of Cameroon educational history, though under a national government, was still largely dominated by missionary efforts. Nevertheless, there was a conscious drive on the part of the government in individual states towards further improvement and development of the different educational systems. The principal objective of educational planning was centered on the improvement of primary schools' enrollment rates with a view to qualitative change. The few mission secondary schools could not accommodate every eligible candidate, and moreover, fees charged could not be afforded everyone. Missionary schools therefore faced rivals with state and lay proprietors, with the former having total control over education at all levels. It was with the federal system that education became highly examination-oriented, with value judgments about educational outcomes. There was therefore a need for the two systems of education, the Francophone subsystem of education and the Anglophone subsystem of education, to harmonize, with eventual introduction of teaching of both languages in primary schools. It was within 1965 that President Amadou Ahidjo, in his speech, argued that the aim of education is not to instruct people for the pleasure of instructing them, but to enable them participate with increased output capacity in the development of their country. He declared it is impossible for the children of one and the same country to be educated under different systems. We do not believe that language barrier is sufficient enough to prevent the harmonization of syllables and structures. Reforms in East Cameroon. The decree of 7 June 1962 organized the Secretariat of State for Education. Each of the Secretariat of State had inspectors of schools. Reforms in West Cameroon. The Law Number 63/COR/5 of 1963, the time spent at primary schooling in West Cameroon dropped from 8 to 7 years in 1964. After the 7 years, the pupils obtained first school leaving certificate. Age range was from 8 to 18. Primary education was supposed to drop further to 6 years by 1965 so as to have the same level as East Cameroon. The organization of the educational system in the Federal Republic of Cameroon 1960 to 1972 was divided into three: primary education, secondary education, teacher training, higher education. In the primary education, there were special authorities responsible for preparation and reformation of primary school curriculum under the control of the minister. The Federal Bureau of Primary Educational Research and Curricula prepared curricula and teaching method also for secondary schools with certain specialized commissions. The Bureau also dealt with problems of bilingualism and curriculum coordination in the two states at the national level. They had the following in the curriculum: basic tool subjects like reading, writing, and arithmetic; knowledge of the society and life like history, geography, civics, health, and nature study. Practical subjects included handicraft and gardening; artistic subjects like physical education, drawing, and painting; religious and moral subjects, language and culture, particularly for mission schools, were also encouraged. In the absence of preschool, primary schools represented in the two states was the first contact a child could have with organized formal education at the age of 6 or 7 years. As far as West Cameroon was concerned, The educational provision was British-oriented primary education, which lasted for even years starting at the age of 6 years, to the exclusion of preschool education, which was not yet popular in this part of the country. At the end of the primary education, children wrote the first school leaving certificate examination and a competitive common entrance examination into secondary school. In East Cameroon, preschool education was later introduced during this period for 3 and 5 years old. This level of education in this section of the country was a short primary school program of 6 years, which led to the certificate d'études primaires élémentaires, equivalent to the first school leaving certificate. The national government during this period opened its first secondary school in West Cameroon, that is the government bilingual secondary grammar school at Nkumbe in Victoria. This was followed a few years later by a separate high school in Bambili, which is the Cameroon College of Arts, Science and Technology. This secondary school offered a 5-year course leading to the West African School Certificate, which was later replaced in 1963 by the London General of Education Ordinary Level. A further 2 years in a separate sixth form college led to the General Certificate of Education Advanced Level. Right up till 1974, these were the two public institutions of secondary education in West Cameroon, including a technical college at Nkumbe, Victoria, which had been created in 1952. In East Cameroon, there were basically no change in entry conditions into secondary education, which by this period, 1960 to 1970, was far more developed than in West Cameroon, with colleges such as Lycée Lelek, Lycée Jos, Lycée de Jeune Fille, all of government origin. Certificates and syllables were the same as before independence. That is to say, after the CAPA, French-speaking candidates for secondary education wrote special entrance examination into secondary schools, organized by individual secondary schools. In the first cycle of secondary school, students prepare for the brevet d'études du premier cycle, and in the second cycle, they wrote the probatoire and then the baccalaureate. Technical and commercial training was provided in technical schools, which offered a 7-year course. Some technical colleges offered a 5-year course, and some colleges for technical instructions a 4-year course. Higher education was also of great significance during this era. The National Center for Advanced Studies was opened in 1961 and was later converted with the assistance of UNESCO into a university in 1962, following degree number 62/DF/289 of 20 July 1962. The university, which was located in East Cameroon, was the starting point of a critical union between many cultures. Being the sole university, students came from West Cameroon, the northern and predominantly Muslim region, and all over East Cameroon to acquire university knowledge. From its inception, the university consisted of 3 principal faculties, each with the power to confer degrees. The faculties include the Faculty of Law and Economic Science, the Faculty of Science, and lastly, the Faculty of Arts and Social Science. In addition to the above, other institutions for higher specialized studies were established throughout the country, such as Higher Teacher Training College in Yaoundé, with an annex in Bambili for higher learning in West Cameroon at the time, the Federal Higher School of Agriculture in Chang, the Federal Higher Technical Polytechnic School, created on 14 June 1971 in Yaoundé, and the School of Administration, also in Yaoundé. On the 14th of June, the University Center of Health Science (CUS), as it was popularly known, was created by Presidential Decree number 69/DF/256 as an institution of higher learning and research within the Federal University of Cameroon. In addition to its main function of training medical doctors and other senior health personnel, the CUS carried out research on health problems in tropical Equatorial Africa and provided medical health care for the local population. On the 15th May 1970, the International High School of Journalism was created with the objective of dispensing a progressive, integrated and practical education at the university level. By a decree of 24th April 1971, the Cameroon Institute of International Relations was created, adding to the growing list of institutions of the Federal University of Cameroon. Other institutions like National School of Administration and Magistracy (ENAM), created by a decree in 1959 and officially opened in 1960, and the Inter-Ares Military School (IMIA), were also created during this era. Although all these schools were found in East Cameroon, successful candidates from all over the Federal Republic were free to seek admission into any of them. However, the use of French as the predominant medium of instruction at the time in most of these institutions constituted a deterrent to English-speaking Cameroonians who still preferred seeking higher education in Nigeria and other English-speaking nations. Conclusively, missionary agencies, which had for long enjoyed autonomy and to an extent monopoly in organizing school programs, now had to contend with two rivals, state and lay proprietors, with the former having total control over education at all levels. It was with the federal system that education became highly examination-oriented, with value judgments about educational outcomes. Remarkable in the national effort was the difference in culture, which brought about difference in structure and of basic qualifications with implications on status.